Okay guys, so today I want to talk about White Forest, and I want to talk about what we need from a ban list to become truly meta relevant. There are a couple different sections that I've broken this down into. I try to, in most of my videos now, put the actual sections so that you can skip through them if you want in the timeline. But this is not going to be a generic ban list reaction or prediction or whatever. I prefer to stay away from the more generic content because there are a lot of other people who are covering that. I want to talk about what makes us worse than the best deck, what hits have to happen to Snake Eyes to bring it closer down to our level, and what is the role of Fiendsmith in all of this. But there are a few important points that I want to make about how this deck actually works that I think are required to understand before we talk about what kind of hits are required and how our deck really can perform. Because there is a certain inherent ceiling on a given deck or a given engine that makes it so that even if there is a ban list that absolutely nukes Snake Eyes, there's still certain things that maybe we can't do or that affect our power level relative to the other decks in the format. So, first of all, there are a number of different variants of this deck. I have just chosen a modified version. I've made some changes to a guy who did not top but played White Forest Toy at the NAWCQ. And this is a pretty standard-ish distribution of cards in terms of White Forest Toy and then a tiny Centurion package. This is probably one of the more popular variants. I'll also briefly go over a couple other versions. One of the versions that I've been playing a lot recently has been the Millennium version because it is easier to pivot into the Closed Heaven line if you get stopped. But there's also just the pure White Forest Toy version, which is also very popular. And then you could use the Millennium cards also to make the Crimson Dragon plays without having to play the bricks or poor draws in the Centurion cards, especially if you were on stuff like Wake Up or Gargoyle or whatever. And then there's also the Runic version, which is kind of like almost in its own category because the Runic cards play in a very different way. But let's look at some of the core limitations of White Forest. So first of all, there aren't true one-card combos in this deck. Now, a one-card combo isn't just great per se. Like, everyone knows that if you just have Trudea, you can Calamity Lock on your opponent's turn. But that's not actually a relevant one-card combo because it loses to a single interruption. So really what a deck needs is it needs strong one-card combos and it needs strong extenders. And ideally, and what we see with Snake Eyes, and especially Fiendsmith Snake Eyes, is not only do they have very, very strong starters, but their extenders are often also starter cards, which means that it doesn't really matter what cards they draw. Almost any of the cards in their engine that they draw are going to be extremely functional, regardless of the game state that you're in. So, if you were to draw Snake Eyes Ash, and you also have Bonfire, there's no conflict. You're still going to be able to resolve your play. We don't have that. So if you ignore the Centurion engine for a moment, and you think about it, Toybox doesn't actually do anything by itself. Estella doesn't do anything, Elzette doesn't do anything, none of these cards do anything by themselves. Even if you normal summon Sylvie, and you add Tails, and you Tails search something else, you still need another send to be able to continue playing. So, and then if you were to say like, oh, well, why don't you just normal Sylvie, add Tails, search Rusia, and then you can go into an 8, but then you didn't make the Diabelle with the Synchro Tuner, and so you're not adding back the Tails, and so you're still kind of stuck. So our deck doesn't have true one-card starters. There aren't starter extender cards in the way that Bonfire is both a starter and an extender, or Wanted or Black Witch are starter extender cards for the Snake Eyes deck. There are very strong starter extender cards in the Centurion deck. So Emblema Oath is the best one, and Stand Up is kind of the second best one, because this can be not only a monster but also a spell and trap, including the stand-up, whereas the stand-up is just giving you access to a monster and it has a cost where you lose a card to do that. But these cards are generally very space intensive in a White Forest deck, and right now, if you don't play a lot of non-engine, you just don't have a chance of playing the game. What I was suggesting in some previous videos is that you can't play hand trap wars with the best decks, and so you're basically forced into playing breakers. But the problem with that is, if you are not at a major event like an NAWCQ, where you're going to be facing mostly Snake Eyes in the top cut, if you're on, for example, Omega ranked ladder, even if you're pretty high on Omega ranked ladder, you are going to be facing a ton of decks that you will completely lose to if you don't have hand traps. Like, you're going to be facing a ton of Crimson Dragon, White Forest decks. So whether that's with the Centurion engine or whatever, you're going to be facing a ton of those. There are, for some reason, still a bunch of Gimmick Puppet players. Branded is also a possibility of facing. So then, if you're, facing a meta like that, or at your locals where you will basically be FTK'd if you don't play hand traps, you have the problem of you can't actually fit in all of these good engine cards that you want to play because you have to play more hand traps. And as we've discussed before, the bare minimum number of hand traps you have to play to be successful is 15. But the thing with playing a bunch of hand traps that is kind of a limiting factor for us and isn't for Snake Eyes is that it's not just about how much space you have in your deck. Like, here you can see, if we were to just take out these breaker cards and replace it with hand traps, you'd be at 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And we maybe don't play the Centurion cards to just maybe go up to 18. Maybe we put in, like a Reinforcement of the Army or another Tails or whatever. So our engine count kind of stays the same, but we stick to just one strategy and we have more hand traps. The problem with that, right, is that you also have to take into consideration, what do your starting hands look like? If you draw 3 hand traps, it means that your other 2 cards, which were the bare minimum required to play, really have to work. And if you don't draw an excellent combination, like a Stellar and Toy Box, then you're not going to be able to play through a single interruption. Or maybe you can play through 2 interruptions, and then you really can't tolerate them having a 3rd hand trap. Now, if you have seen, actually, let me just show you the basic builds from the NEWCQ that just happened. This was the first place list. So Snake Eyes Fiendsmith. The typical Snake Eyes decks now are playing approximately 20 hand traps. I believe this guy is on 19 plus the Azirun, but obviously this could be in the side deck and this could be a 20th hand trap. But the point is, they don't care not only about using this much non-engine space because of the high quality starter extender cards they have. They do not need multiple cards in hand to combo. And if they do have multiple cards in hand, it gives them more gas to push through things. But they also don't mind having these cards in their hand. And there's a big difference between space in your deck and space in your hand. We need multiple engine spaces in every single hand just to be able to play. So that's one of the main problems that we have. We also have kind of like a lower chance of playing through interruptions. If you just, so this is a Millennium build that I've been playing online recently. It really matters what the combination of cards is. It's not just, do you have engine cards in your hand? Like if you draw a tank and a Rusia, those are technically part of your engine, but those are not the cards you want to play. Or they're not the cards you want to draw, but you have to play them. Whereas, having like LZ and Soldier is solid, or LZ and Box, or Stellar and Box, Stellar and Soldier. So there's a very big difference in quality in the types of engine cards you can play. And basically where that leaves us is we need Snake Eyes to be brought down to our level in the sense that they don't have such high quality starter extender cards and are able to play so many non-engine pieces that we can't outcompete them in hand trap wars. And also remember that playing the breaker approach with this deck is less doable if you are in a locals or if you are on like Omega ladder or whatever other ladder you're playing online where a bunch of people are playing functional FTKs like Calamity Lock or whatever. I have played a ton of matches where I'm only on breakers and I've been Calamity Locked in the standby phase playing against basically a mirror that would have no chance of doing that to a single hand trap or to 2 hand traps. So we need some changes when it comes to this. The extra deck is also something that's maybe worth talking about. One of the downsides of playing the Fiendsmith cards is that it takes up a lot of your spots in your extra deck, and you have to kind of condense what your extra deck game plan is. So with the Millennium cards, one of the things that I noticed is because Sanganjin is an 8 and Golem is a 6, you can actually go straight into Crimson Dragon plays even without playing the Centurion cards, and that's pretty useful. But as you can see here, I have a pretty small package. Like I can't fit the Supernova Dragon or whatever. I'm playing just Chaos Angel. I don't have good targets for the Diabell like Zapper Shrimp or whatever, aside from the White Forest cards. Whereas if you go and look at the Snake Eyes deck again, their entire game plan is completely fulfilled, even taking up all of these spots with the Fiendsmith cards. They basically are making Appaloosa, they're usually making a Nightmare Phoenix so the Apple can't be destroyed by battle, and then they have a Masquerena play into Little Knight. Or certain boards will also opt for the Silhouette Rabbit, and that'll adjust slightly how their board plays. Because they have Beatrice, they have access to whatever they want. If they were doing degenerate stuff or if they were just trying to dump like the Snake Eyes Ash to bring back off of a princess. So in terms of their actual game plan, the Fiendsmith cards don't really compress the deck in a meaningful way to where they're forced to adjust their game plan. Whereas if you look at our deck, if you look at our deck, and I bring this up again, these Fiendsmith cards take up so much space that even if I am on a smaller engine with no Desiree, I still have to choose what I'm playing in my extra deck. Whereas, let's see, do I have a... what was this guy playing? So this guy on the Centurion version, you can see that he can fit in cards like Blackwing Assault Dragon, which are absolutely not core. You can still play the great cards like Gallant Granite. You can play cards like Baguska, so you can pass against Shifter. There's the Chaos Angel, but there's also flex spots like Draco Berserker of the 10E. There are multiple flex spots here for the Crimson Dragon target, both Auxilla and Legatia. And then you still have your standard package here. So we can't do this if we're playing the Fiendsmith cards. And so we're at a huge disadvantage in that our game plan with the extra deck is constricted, and the cards that we can tolerate in our hand are constricted in that we need to draw multiple engine cards. So, okay, now let's actually answer the question and what is the whole point of this video, which is what hits have to be done for us to be able to play. So I don't know if they're going to hit a generic card like Bonfire. Maybe you could argue that they like having these cards in when their deck's like Ashened because it was a TCG exclusive, although nobody really plays that and it doesn't have meta relevance, but it does have, you know, maybe some lore relevance because that's supposed to be kind of like a Dark Souls reference. So this is also one of the newer cards in the archetype, so I feel like it's less likely this would be hit. When it comes to Black Witch and Wanted, the difference between Wanted and Black Witch is that this card is a better card than Black Witch because you get the draw off of this. So this is the effect that says, during your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target one of your sinful spoils, spell/traps that is banished or in your graveyard, accept itself, place it on the bottom of the deck, then draw one card. So you gain some recursion here so that you could, you know, search for the thing that you put back to the bottom and you get another draw. Whereas this one just costs you something. So you have to send a card from your hand or field to the graveyard to special summon it. That's an inherent summon. And then if they chain, you know, like Imperm Veil or whatever to this card, you don't get the search off of it. So this is a much fairer card inherently than Wanted. And so I feel like the play here would be they should get rid of Wanted. Like, I doubt that they would just straight ban this card, but like at least put this card to 1 so you don't have to worry about them hard drawing this card. Like that shouldn't be the case. There also are, as we've seen, there like ways to search this card after Rage of the Abyss. And they're not going to touch the Fiendsmith stuff, obviously, in the next ban list because this archetype has just come out. So, like, this really, like, if it was up to me, this card would just be banned. I think it is too powerful, and the Black Witch is fine. You know, make people play it at 3, even if they're not playing into Snake Eyes, and it's just a worse card, and it trades less favorably with interruptions. But you also need to do something about their access to their engine, and one of the most obvious ways of doing that is hitting Beatrice. So Beatrice is a card that generally, when it is popular in the meta, is used for some degenerate purposes, and in this deck it is also engine because you can use just Fiendsmith plays to go into Beatrice, and then you dump the Snake Eyes Ash or whatever extender you need, and then you turn your Link 2 and your Beatrice into the Promethean Princess, and then that brings out the card that you dumped so you can continue playing. And there are different variants of this, like ways that you can do this, so they have a huge amount of flexibility, and like that just should not be allowed. Like this should not benefit this deck so much more than basically every other deck, and still allow them to do the same degenerate stuff that, you know, other decks can do. They don't even need to do it because they have so many non-engine spaces in their deck. Now you could also argue that they should be hitting some of the power cards in the deck, like Flamberge, or Snake Eyes Diabellstar. I feel like Snake Eyes Diabellstar would not be a very good hit because aside from this card being newer, like the deck was still the best deck before this card came out. Banning Flamberge would be a massive hit to the deck. And I think so would Oak because it removes an in-engine searchable extender. I think they could also possibly ban Temple because Temple is one of those cards that makes it to where The deck is so incredibly resilient that even if you clear absolutely everything on their board and, you know, they get back like one monster, they float one thing, and then in your turn, they're still pushing out the Masquerena that they put into their spell and trap zone off the Flamberge. So there needs to be some damage to their resilience, especially because the advent of the Fiendsmith cards, which makes this even better, make it so that just any two bodies is closed heaven, and then through, especially if people are playing Necrocrypt Princess, is the entire Fiendsmith line. And so, yeah, this deck's resilience at least needs to be hurt. Even if the deck was super consistent and it had tons of starter extender cards, they should still be able to lose to good hand trap combos. Like if you draw Nib Veiler and this deck just plays through it like nothing, like that shouldn't be allowed. So that's my main criticism with this deck. Yeah, I think Apo also is one of those cards that it shouldn't be the case that every single deck can make this, and it's like whose engine is better, just putting bodies onto the field to make Apo and then do something else after that. So if these two cards are banned, Beatrice and Apo, it would change the deck, even if they didn't hit anything in the deck, but they should change that the quality of their starter extenders is not as high as it currently is, even if it was like banning or limiting just this card. Like even if it was just these three hits, Beatrice ban, Appaloosa ban, and Wanted to One or banned, like that would be relevant. Yeah, I don't know if they're going to nuke this deck. And so then just to wrap this video up, if we take another look at like, if we take another look at our deck right now, I think that those types of hits would mean we can't play Appaloosa, but we have lots of really good uses for those bodies. Like we could make multiple rank 4s. We could maybe have more space in pure builds to fit in stuff like Daigusto Emerald, which would help in our grind, which is useful if we are playing stuff like one Sylvie and one Rusia. And we need to be able to cycle those cards back into the deck so that we have targets for a Stellar or whatever. Maybe we could play a larger Crimson package, whether or not Calamity is banned. So yeah, like these hits, like us not being able to make Apple, even though we can make Apple pretty easily, is fine. Like there's still lots of things that we can do from that. And then we would have more extra deck space, even if we were playing a Fiendsmith package. And if we weren't playing a Fiendsmith package, like here, then we would have even more like flex spots. This guy, so there's no Appaloosa here right now, like. And that would be fine. Like we don't even have to play this card. Like this is another flex spot there. So there's other stuff we could do. We could play, you know, like Zapper Shrimp, Goatee of the Deep Beyond. There are lots of things that we could put in. So this doesn't really hurt us. Those types of bans don't hurt us, but they would hurt Snake Eyes more. And then also it would make it to where we don't have to say, if we don't play Breakers against Snake Eyes Fiendsmith, but we just play hand traps and we accept that our deck will be a little bit less consistent because we're drawing more non-engine, that'll be okay because the best decks aren't going to be able to just power through everything when they drew a handful of hand traps. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Let me know if you have any opinions in the comments below or if you have any feedback for the video. Thanks for watching.